Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
The Workology Podcast is sponsored by WorkMarket, an ADP company. We often spend more time with our colleagues than we do with our family and close friends, which is why so many of our friendships are with our coworkers. They share our experiences and can be a great source of support when we're facing challenges. Navigating friendships at work, however, can be tricky. Managers and senior leadership set the tone and policy, and some close bonds in the workplace can be detrimental to engaging, particularly new hires, as groups can become cliques quite easily. I'm so glad to have an expert on our podcast today to talk about the social science of navigating workplace friendships. Science journalist Lydia Denworth delves into the science of social bonds, including those in the workplace, in her new book, Friendship: The Evolution, Biology, and Extraordinary Power of Life's Fundamental Bond. Lydia, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about your background. I'm so excited to have you talk about this topic. You have been writing about science and interviewing scientists as a journalist for publications like Scientific American, where you're a contributing editor, and Psychology Today. What led you to work in this area?
Well, I've been a journalist for a long time, but I morphed into being a science journalist about halfway through, some 15 years ago. And it really had to do with the subjects that interested me the most, had to do with health and education, but then digging into how to tell those stories, it felt like I needed the evidence. And I started reading the work of scientists. I mean, it's ironic because I did not study science in school. I studied history and I took the minimum science courses possible, which just shows that you don't know what you might care about when you're young. Now I wish I had taken more, but I find science fascinating. I think it's important. I think it's one of the most important things I could be spending my time doing, and it's a great story to boot.
What's the impetus for writing your most recent book?
Well, I was already covering the brain quite a bit. That was my area of focus within science. And I got interested in the fact that neuroscientists are interested in friendship. And that's not the piece of friendship that we often think about. Usually people understand it to be cultural. And it is. There's plenty of layers of friendship that are cultural, but it turns out that there is a biology to it, and there's an evolutionary story to friendship that most of us are not familiar with. And so that's the story I tell in this book.
We know that people with friends at work enjoy coming to work more, and they also have lower rates of illness and injury, and they're more productive and efficient. What has your research shown you about these bonds?
Friendship in general is critical for our health and well-being, both psychologically, but also physiologically. And so people with better friends at work are likely to not be out as much sick and, have fewer sick days and better retention. But it speaks to the larger power of friendship, which is that it affects our stress responses, our cognitive health, our mental health, our cardiovascular functioning, our immune system. It even affects how long we live. The more socially connected you are, the more friends actually, quality matters more than quantity. So the more integrated you are, the more connected you feel, the longer you live.
Is the inverse true, meaning that not having friends at work maybe negatively impacts how you feel about your jobs?
Yes, it is true. It is true that people who feel lonely at work, and there's quite 20 to 30% of employees say that they feel lonely at work, and about 50% of CEOs feel lonely because, of course, they don't have peers or equals in the same way that they can confide in. When you feel lonely, it's not good for you in many different ways. But at work, it leads to more turnover, lower reviews, less productivity, less efficiency. And in, your wider life, it affects how, it affects your health and even your mortality.
Why do you think relationships are so important for culture and retention when it comes to the workplace?
I think the word culture that you use is the critical piece here. Are you creating a place that feels positive and where people feel connected and supported? Because that's what friendship is about. Or are you creating a kind of cutthroat environment? And of course, this is an interesting element from an evolutionary point of view. We think of natural selection as a competitive process, and that's true to some extent. Survival of the fitter, the people who are better adapted for a certain environment, or the individuals in different species who were better adapted are the ones who survived. But it's also true that just as much as there's been competition, there's been an important element of cooperation in human evolution and the evolution of other species. And I think you can trace that straight into a workplace environment. If you'll allow me to skip over thousands of years of human history and say that there are real benefits to working together in a sort of positive and productive way, and that a feeling of camaraderie really helps with that.
When we first talked and we were talking about this podcast, we weren't living in the world that we are now, where most of us are remote not by necessarily choice, but out of necessity. And I wondered what advice you would give workplace leaders and those remote employees on maybe combating the isolation that they might be feeling right now, not having in-person interactions, just those virtual ones with their counterparts who they work with every day. But now, instead of in the office, it's over the phone and over internet.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because before coronavirus, there was one story to tell about people, because there were plenty of people who work remotely. I mostly work by myself as a freelance writer. And it's important that people who are working alone in general are taking steps to make sure they're connected, that they, are talking with their colleagues on a regular basis, that managers in the office are paying attention, but the employees have a responsibility to sort of get themselves out in the world and connect, but the managers have a responsibility to make employees feel connected. Now, of course, everyone's in the same boat. It's different, but I think on some levels it is easier because the experience is so universal. I mean, well, easier is not it, but is maybe not the right word, because of course everybody is adapting to this new normal and nobody quite knows how this is going to work, but at least the experience is shared, right? And that is that's a really important part psychologically of what helps people get through things. And it's actually interesting with friendship. For instance, even young kids, like if somebody's being bullied in school, they do much better if they have another friend who's also been through that experience. And so not to say that we're in the similar thing, but the idea that shared plight helps and it bonds us is really true. So I think acknowledging it, what everybody's dealing with, is important, and also changing expectations somewhat to understand that it is not as easy to, not everybody's equally able to work in the same ways from home. But then we have to laugh in life, and we have to find things to appreciate. And that's true in our personal lives right now when we're separated from our regular lives, but it's also true in our work lives. We're all adjusting. So it has to do with awareness, and then with using technology and making sure that as many people as possible are brought in to that circle of, I'm assuming that most of your listeners are sort of, their companies are well organized to have all the employees have the technology they need, but there still need to be boundaries. I guess that is one of the important things here, is that we've taken away the ability for people to separate their work lives and their home lives. And we need to find some ways to make sure that we give them that back, that boundary.
I'm glad that you talked about boundaries, because I'm already starting to hear about that from others who maybe aren't used to working remote. And I have an office that I normally go to, and I forgot, because now I'm here all the time at the house versus the office, how easy it is to just work 24 hours a day. And then to
Yes.
abandon all those relationships and all those friendships and things that you had before you started working remote.
Yeah, it's both the great benefit of working from home and the great sort of burden is that it's on you to create the boundaries and the routine that will preserve your health and your productivity because and so this is something that I think as a group employees have to work on together and they have to discuss. I mean, an interesting thing some of my friends have said is that now that they're working remote and they're in video meetings with their colleagues, they're getting this look into people's intimate lives, right? You can see their house. You can literally see, and some of us have shared that and some of us haven't with people we work with. Sometimes it's not because you're not close friends, it's just because you didn't have a reason to do it. But so, yeah, I think getting through this, what the mental health, I'm doing reporting on the mental health side of this crisis right now. And what the psychiatrists and psychologists are saying is you need a routine, you need structure, and you need a break. You need a break from the news and you need a break from your work. You need the same kind of routine that you might have had before.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology Podcast. We're talking today about the science of friendships with Lydia Denworth. A special thank you to our sponsor, Work Market, an ADP company.
You have a handle on your W-2 employees, but what about all of those 1099 contractors? With Work Market, your company gains visibility into your extended workforce. Learn more at workmarket.com.
This is great. And I think so helpful for people. So having a routine and then boundaries are really important. So managers know that you need to let your people, don't be texting them at 8 p.m. on a Friday and then on Saturday and Sunday when they're only working Monday through Friday.
Whatever your rules were before or whatever, you've got to stick to them. And unless, of course, I mean, so in my world of science journalism, everybody's working nonstop because this is a science story in many ways, right? That's happening right now. But we're used to that. We work on deadline and then you're done and then you turn it in and then it's over. But yeah, create those boundaries and honor them. And be thoughtful of the stresses, the extra stresses that everybody is, or the extra stress that people are feeling now.
How has social media changed friendships?
Well, in the workplace, what's really, of course, that's interesting is that it blurs the lines in between our different parts of life. And that can be a good thing because, as we've said, friendship within the workplace can be a very powerful force for good and for productivity and efficiency. But there's more transparency, and that sometimes is a bad thing. People forget a little bit who's out there looking and watching, and we're always telling young kids. I happen to have teenagers and college-age kids who are beginning to look at the work, think about applying for jobs, and you're always warning them about how what they do online and in their social media can be visible by an employer someday. But I think that adults sometimes even forget that everything they put on social media is visible to their colleagues as well. And so there's that has to be kind of addressed and thought about. But on the other hand, social media, I mean, right now in this moment, the virtues of digital technology and social media have never been more apparent, because if we didn't have that, we would really feel isolated. And what I've been saying is that instead of social distancing, we should think of it as physical distancing, and we need to continue being as social as we can, just from afar. What friendship is about is helping people through the stresses of day-to-day life, and about being there for people to help them in a crisis. And this is certainly a crisis and a stressful time. So we have to keep being social, and social media lets us do that. But it does complicate things. So you have to be aware of the boundaries again.
Because we form strong bonds at work with our coworkers, and we talked about the value of workplace friendships. How complicated is it when we move those friendships from just work to those outside of the workplace? Do you think we should handle those differently?
The thing we have to keep in mind when we're talking about workplace friendships is that sometimes there are differences in authority, right? Or hierarchy that complicate a friendship. So there can be tensions, or there can be things we decide not to discuss actively. Like we say, you don't want to intrude on into people's personal lives, or you don't want to always be bringing your personal life into the workplace when people are trying to get their work done. The flip side is sometimes you have to agree that you're going to have the awkward discussion if you're friends, but somebody might be up for a promotion, or you're competing against each other for promotion, things like that. It's often better to try to have a discussion and to be a little bit more open about it, because that adds an element to the friendship that you don't have if you don't work together. The other big piece, I think, is that it's important to be mindful of the cliques that can form inside companies. And, we tend to be drawn to people who are like us. And so similarity and proximity matter a lot in terms of who we form friendships with. And that's fine. But in a work environment, it can have the effect of leaving people out, especially people from different kinds of backgrounds and cultures. And if we create social events at work, back when we're going to be able to do that again, we sometimes, what happens is that people just socialize with the people they're already friends with, right? So I think that managers need to be intentional about creating events and programming that crosses boundaries, and make sure that you try to bring people together from different parts of the company or from different social groups. And that's healthy. And it's important that different ideas are voiced, and that people have that opportunity and they don't feel shut out by the tightness of a friendship group.
What's interesting is, having worked in HR for a really long time, oftentimes HR leaders, it's really isolating. And so you can actually be friends with anyone at work, especially if it's like the one location that you're responsible for. Because I have found personally that oftentimes if I'm friends with somebody, inevitably, like we go out for have happy hour, inevitably a week later or some time passes, but I'll be doing an investigation that involves those people.
Right.
And then it makes it really complex.
Yeah, I wish I had the statistic. I have employees and CEOs and loneliness in the workplace, but we need one for HR managers specifically, because I'm sure that's true. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's a hard time. I mean, you're kind of the probably not unlike the CEO in a way. Like, you're the person that they go to for information, but you also are trying to be a neutral third party when you are dealing with workplace investigations and advising on performance documentation and other decisions.
Right. You deal with hiring and firing and raises and investigations and a lot of private information, and that complicates things. I would assume that what is important to do is to have relationships with fellow HR managers from other companies. You can't always, obviously, you can't talk about proprietary information, but you've got a lot in common there and a lot to talk about. And so then you have to seek those work. It's still a professional friendship, but you have to seek it out elsewhere. But I think it's really important to do that. I mean, that's what I can say. It's different, but the same, in that as a freelance writer or a book author, you have to work to put yourself in settings where you can interact with and make friends with people who do what you do, because it's not in my day-to-day life, right? That's who I can talk to. And so I imagine that that's what happens for HR managers too. And if it's not, then people should be working at it.
Yeah, and I'm encouraging HR leaders to do more of that, because it's easy to kind of be stuck in your little bubble and
to think you
really
don't have
alone.
time for that, and to go to the conference, or to, take time out for, even if it's in your same city, for a social event among HR people. But I think that there's real benefit to that.
So maybe we don't want to be friends with everyone, and but we do want to build relationships with those people, specifically employees. And I think one area that I think relationships are really important is new hires when they come into the office. What are some ways, we don't have to all be best friends, but what are some ways that we can help develop relationships with different people? Is there a formula for success?
I'm not so sure that it's a formula for success so much as a mindset. First of all, just to understand that it matters and that it should be a priority. And it has a lot to do with whatever the culture of your workplace is. But knowing that those people need some onboarding, right? And that they need the opportunity to meet people, and setting up mentor relationships, I think, is really important. Setting up social events for new hires as a group, if you have multiple people at once, or setting up, being intentional about making it so that those new hires go around and meet different people in different ways, whatever that means in your workplace. It's and asking, expecting that the existing hires, the existing employees will make that a priority, and, making that an expectation, because it would be easy for them to think, who cares about the new guy?
Well, I think most HR people know that the new guy is really important, because the new guy is what's going to help drive productivity and performance for the business. Sometimes it's just convincing others,
That's what I'm saying. Not the HR people, but the other employees, to convince them, that to make sure it's clear that it's part of their job to help bring these people into the fold, and that the HR people, however you go about doing that, right? But making that an understanding within the company that
Sure.
It's everybody's job.
Well, it's like any type of social cultural atmosphere, like even if moving into a new neighborhood, right, and trying to develop relationships and friendships with neighbors and people in the surrounding houses, or they go to the same dog park or whatever. The workplace, and for new hires, people who are coming into your company, it's to help them feel welcomed and start to have those friendships or those personal relationships, so they feel more tied to that social community.
Yes, exactly. And feeling connected and like you're valued and you matter has so much to do with how hard you work, your enjoyment of work. And, that's that fundamental piece about why friendship and a sort of friendly vibe in the office matters so much.
So let's say that we're new to an area, or we're looking to make new friends. How do we go about doing that? Is there some tips that you can provide us?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, in adult friendship, there's two things that I think people fail to consider. One is time, that it takes time to make friends. It takes time to become friends. One of the statistics that has gotten the most attention from my book is that there was a study that shows that it takes about 50 hours to consider someone a casual friend instead of an acquaintance. 50 hours of time together. It takes about 90 hours to think of them as a good friend, and 200 hours to be best friends. And it's easy to come by, 50 hours, 90 hours when you're in college and living in a dorm or going to class together all the time. It's a lot harder when you're a busy adult or you're new in town. And so understanding that and recognizing that you have to put in the time is important. It isn't going to just come for free. That leads to the second piece, which is motivation and a kind of willingness to make yourself vulnerable as an adult is a big piece of it too. It's great to go find people with shared interests outside of your company. I mean, I hope many of us, one of my very closest friends today is somebody I met through work 20 years ago. And so, it's entirely possible for those relationships to be deep and long lasting. But if you're in a new place and you're looking to meet new people, look for shared interests, look for groups that do what you like to do. But then you have to make yourself go. And it can be so hard to walk into an event when you know no one the first time. But it's important to try. It's important to put yourself out there and be a little bit vulnerable. invite someone for a drink after work if you think that you have reason to think that you could be friends. If they say no, then you can't be aggressive. You've got to move on to somebody else. But so it's just that putting in the effort and understanding that it isn't going to come as easily as it did when you were younger. But that doesn't mean you can't get there. We make new friends at every point in life.
That's a time commitment, 50, 90, 200 hours. If you're already busy, maybe you're working a really demanding job, it can be a challenge.
It is, which is one reason why we tend to hang on to friends from earlier in life when we had more time, and we built that, those deeper connections. But, life is long. Friendship is a lifelong endeavor. And I think it's also really important to understand. I mean, so yes, we're busy, but let me give you one of my favorite, most powerful statistics from the book is that a study out of Harvard of the entire lives of a group of men from Harvard and then from inner city Boston followed them every few years and looked at their health and then looked at what was going on in their lives. And what they found was that of the men who lived into their 80s, the thing that best predicted their health at 80 was not their wealth or professional success or their cholesterol levels or anything about their physical health when they were 50. It was the satisfaction with relationships at 50 that best predicted their health and happiness at 80, which means you cannot wait until you are retired to focus on friendship. You need to do it all the way through.
Well, thank you, Lydia, for taking time to talk to us. Your book is titled Friendship, The Evolution, Biology, and Extraordinary Power of Life's Fundamental Bond. Where can people go to learn more about you and your book?
My website is lydiadenworth.com. And you can find all about the book and me, and you can find me on social media. I'm on Twitter at Lydia Denworth and some other places as well. I've got a newsletter that you can access through my website. It's all there.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate it.
Special thanks to our sponsor, Work Market, an ADP company. Our coworkers may or may not be our lifelong friends, but social science shows that we're better when we have friends at work. As HR leaders, it's important that we encourage socialization and demonstrate the benefits of doing so to senior leadership. Those holdouts that still believe work is for working, not socializing. Having these friendships at work makes work better, and it makes our employees better. They are more likely to be engaged and stay with our companies longer. I'm so glad for the opportunity to have talked with Lydia and hear all about how friendships can help us in the workplace. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller Merrill. Until next time, you can visit workology.com to listen to all our previous podcast episodes.